Willing to stay after a little bit if you have questions and other topics we can discuss. So we will move on to discussing VORs and nav aids.
1 second. Shane, are you recording this?
Yeah, you started.
Okay.
Oh, okay, awesome, great. So the nav aids will help you on any written test, but the fundamental skill to answer those questions will help us as VFR glider pilots, even in the local area, because it learns how to create a mental model of where point on the ground is, a nav aid, where you are, and how to fly there in between. So it's a great skill to have. Begin by discussing NDBs. So an NDB stands for non-directional beacon. Just ignore the runway for right now. An NDB is a medium frequency nav aid, virtually the same frequencies as an AM radio station. NDBs date back to the 1930s. They were your beacon, or your beacon airways. So in World War II, the Doolittle Raiders were trying to fly the China base on beacons. Well, they were the low and medium frequency and HF frequency beacons. So the NDB uses that HF radio frequency, similar spectrum as an AM radio station. And all it does, the ground station is charted in magenta, or actually it's brown, now it's charted in brown, with that bullseye with the dots. The airborne component is known as an RMI, radio magnetic indicator, with a needle that points to the station. All the time, it's a homing needle that points to the station. There are two different styles of RMI indicators that you'll see. Some always keep the bezel with north pointed up. Those are known as relative bearing indicators. And then there's a movable card. Different presentations, we won't go into depth on that right now. What you need to know is the needle points to the station. If it's a fixed card, RMI, then it always indicates north, regardless of where the plane is pointed. North is always up on that instrument. So if we're flying south, but that needle's pointing off our left wing, all of a sudden, the station is to our east. Even though the instrument would indicate north up with the arrow to the left from your perspective of 270. NDBs are obsolete, only a few left in the country. I don't believe there are any questions regarding NDBs on the glider test, so we will move on for now. If you have specific questions on those, find me afterward, and we can go through a better explanation. What you will be tested on are VORs. Stands for Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range. So it's a VHF frequency. Less prone to interference from lightning and ionization in the atmosphere at sunset than the older radio stations were. But VORs are line of sight. So if this is our station, if we're super far out and down low, we're below the cone of the radio beams. So as long as we have sufficient altitude, line of sight within the radio range, what's called the service volume, we can receive that station. What the VOR does is it emits once I get this switched back over. Stand by momentarily.
Please hold while
This
I
is your final
access that
control.
information.
Yeah. There we go. So these stations are NDV, or VORs, very high frequency omnidirectional range. And you can see it has the compass rose around the station. That's how it's charted. That compass rose is aligned with magnetic north. So you'll see the lines on a VFR sectional are slightly angled, because magnetic north and true north are misaligned. The VOR station emits two signals simultaneously on the same frequency, but they're slightly phase shifted, meaning the waves are offset. The receiver measures that offset between 0, meaning it's perfectly in line, through 360 degrees of offset until it perfectly aligns again. What that gives us is 360 unique lines emitting from the station, like spokes on a bicycle wheel. We can see that on this graphic. This bold line, straight north, in this simulator just represents what we call radial 360. Radial 090 would be due east, magnetic east. 180, 270. The airborne component is called a CDI, Course Deviation Indicator. That's this whole instrument. We can use this knob called an OBS. Which apparently I have to pay for. So, on the actual instrument, you would twist this knob, and it can move the selected radial. So as it sits right now, I have this CDI tuned for the 360 radial. And you can see that CDI line is full scale deflected to the west. Don't think of it as left, think of it as west. That's one of the big keys to using this instrument. It's deflected to the west. Well, that makes sense. My desired course is west of the aircraft, meaning the aircraft is to the east of the station. And it's full scale deflected, meaning I'm beyond 10 degrees off course. If we get within 10 degrees...
Clayton, can I point something
Yes.
out? The top one being VOR 1 is up to the upper left, and VOR 2 is...
Yes, good point. Yep. Yeah, so I'm only referencing this particular VOR, which is shown on VOR 2. Everything else on this screen you can ignore. Thank you. You can see here, if I move the aircraft to the south, I'm closer to the line that goes from north to south. Closer to radial 360 and 180. We see that needle came off the wall. Needle is alive, meaning I now can measure how many degrees off course I am. Full scale deflection is 10 degrees. So we can use these dots and This matches the FAA written test and supplement, which I believe has the 5-dot CDI. Makes it easy. Each dot represents 2 degrees. So right here, we're about 9 degrees off course. The desired course is 9 degrees to our west, so we are 9 degrees east. Now, there are a few useful sayings to memorize when we're talking about VORs. Like heading, like course. Here, you can see we're heading north. So, I have tuned the northern radio. If you're going to the station, tune through. Like heading, like course, we're going to, tune through. Remember how we said there are 2 radio waves? Yeah, thank you. Sinusoidal waves that are offset slightly. Well, 360 and 180 are exact reciprocals. The equipment recognizes it as the same line. And so, to prevent getting confused in how we use it, to prevent what's called reverse sensing, just remember those sayings. If we're going to the station, we tune through. So if I want to go and follow this line north through the station, I want to tune to the station. Go through it. So I tune radial 360. And then my course matches my heading. If you have like course and like heading, then we can look at this instrument and say course is to our left. If we want to follow this line to the station, we need to turn left. And you will notice as I bring that aircraft toward the left, that CDI is progressively moving toward the center until I'm on course to the station with the 360 radial tuned. Let's talk about the to from indicator on the CDI. There's an arrow that shows which direction the station is, if you program it correctly. Like heading, like course, so that to from arrow is reliable. I need to introduce now what happens if we program it incorrectly.
Because there are some questions showing a from.
There are. And there are times that's a totally valid input. Now I'm flying away from the station. So I'm not going to, I do not want to tune through the station. We're to the north, so I can tune the 360. I'm flying away from the station. We see needles alive, we're receiving course, and we are flying away from the station. Like heading, like course, flying away, so the from indicator is reliable. I know that between these two instruments, I know I am to the north of the station. The station is to my south. The course is to my west, meaning I am to the east of course. And we can measure, we are exactly 8 degrees east of the course.
In what sense would you use that?
Even as a VFR pilot, I make use of VOR stations to navigate and reference on cross countries. So I've used them before to mark cross radials. One time I was flying along a road out west, tracking the road due north, and I would count the number of mountain valleys, and it was on the 8th valley was my turn east to go up to the next town.
You talking about glider or you talking about power?
Power.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the key. But as a VFR pilot, the skill still applies. Well, there was wildfire smoke that day, so I couldn't count the number of valleys. So what I did is I programmed my VOR for cross radial. I knew exactly what radial would be centered when I hit my turn point to turn east. So I was able to fly along that road until my CDI centered up, indicating I was on the cross radial. Well, intersection of two lines, that's my point. And I can make the turn from next down. Again, as glider pilots, the use is limited, but not impossible. Alright, real quick, I'll introduce the premise of reverse sensing. So far, I've shown you how it works if we program it correctly. If we don't, then things get confusing. Same general location. All I did is I adjusted my heading. Now we're heading south. In this case, I'm not following that rule like heading like course. So we're heading to the south, but we still made the mistake of keeping radial 3602. I'm trying to go to the station, so which radial should I tune? If I want to go due south through the station. 180, because I'm going to, so I want to tune through the radial on the opposite side. I have mismatched heading and course, heading 180, keeping 360 selected. I'm now reverse sensing. Meaning, which direction do I have to turn according to this instrument to get back on my course? Just looking at this instrument.
To the right. West.
Left.
To the left.
To the left.
Because if this is mounted in my panel, and I don't catch my mistake of reverse sensing, well, that CDI is to the left, it's easy to get confused and turn left. But in reality, you can see the course is off to the aircraft right. That's why I said don't think of it in terms of left-right, think of it in cardinal directions. If I look at this without concern for where I'm pointed, I can see the course is to my west. And then I can check this instrument. Well, west is a right turn. So turn to the right and it centers up. When I'm teaching instrument pilots to understand VORs, we will run through some more examples. I can hide the aircraft on this simulator, move it all around, and have you guess at its location. That's great practice for the written test. In order to internalize this principle, when I was going through school, my instructor assigned me a packet of 250 examples, where it would give me sometimes the CDI, and I would have to draw the aircraft. Sometimes it would be the aircraft, I'd have to write the CDI, and we had to pass that. It's a skill you have to practice to be great with, but you can learn the basics within 30 minutes. Well enough to pass the test. Even if you don't study it at all, if you know everything else, this is well within the margin of still passing the written. But you're missing out on being the best airman you can be. You can see how it's kind of a mental puzzle. Where am I? Where's the station? Where am I heading? Where am I going? How does this all align? So if you learn this, you'll be better prepared for any flying. Because in gliders, we rarely fly in a straight line. If we're in a thermal, doing 15 revolutions, steep turn after steep turn, it's very easy to lose track of your current heading. You roll wings level, now you're trying to look at a paper map that doesn't show your position. You're looking at a magnetic compass, and you've just done a bunch of steep turns. How do we figure out where we're going? Well, it uses the same skill we developed with these VORs. So, if you want to come up after we're done today, I can give or recommend some good resources to practice these VOR setups, as well as some great videos. Again, the 3 ground schools I mentioned before for airspace also have free videos on YouTube for VFR and instrument pilots explaining VORs. And sometimes hearing it multiple ways is always beneficial. Alright, what specific questions do you have on VORs?
When you're flying, how would you set the new VOR? How would you find the new VOR source?
Yeah. So I will go ahead and connect the other tablet and we will view that. Fourth light. We see that large compass rose around Muncie. That tells me right away there's a VOR. It is not printed as its own symbol because it is co-located on the airport in this case, but we see the box with the information for this VOR located up here. It'll always be somewhere around that compass rose or close to it. We can see this station is a VOR DME. So DME is distance measuring equipment. Our gliders don't even have VOR, so don't be concerned about DME. Muncie is the name of the VOR. The frequency, 114.4. That is a frequency we would load in the nav radio to correspond with the VOR receiver. Channel 91 for DME, it automatically sequences. That's the identifier, K, or just MIE. Yep, 3-letter identifier. So on old-fashioned radios, anytime we set a radio, tune, identify, source, course. So tune that frequency into the nav radio. Identify. If it's old-fashioned, turn on your audio for nav 1, listen to the Morse code sequence. And really, any aircraft before or with avionics from before 2006, we need to listen to Morse code. So it's not that obsolete. But we don't have to have it memorized because it's printed on the chart. So dash dash dot 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 is the code for Marion. If we hear that, we know it's reliable to navigate with. Modern avionics. So for any airplane pilots, the Garmin G430, 530s and newer, G1000s, 700s, G500s, as well as the modern Avidynes, they will have the MIE identifier pop up in green. The frequency turns green when it's reliable. At that point, we can tune, identify, source, make sure you have it pulled up, visible in the aircraft, course. We can tune our desired course. And then we're good to fly and navigate with it. Like any system, it can break. If you tune in the wrong frequency, or if it's down for maintenance, it's not reliable to navigate. So if it is in-op, every, I believe it's 3 transmissions of the identifier, MIE, you will hear the Morse code test transmitted as well. So if you're relying on it for navigation, we may continually make sure it is valid. If the aircraft is in a bank and your VOR antenna happens to get shadowed by the metal structure of the aircraft, you can lose signal temporarily. I've flown over a old uranium mine while tracking a VOR. It was cool because I was flying, all of a sudden that VOR needle started spazzing out, and then it recentered as soon as I was by the uranium mine. So there's something about that mineral that interfered with the electromagnetic radiation of the VHF spectrum.
Heavy metal.
Heavy metal. Yep. What else? Service volumes. Service volumes, not good going to get into right now. You can find information on that listed in Chapter 1 of the Aeronautical Information Manual, Air Navigation, under VORs. Those are circles going out a certain range and a certain known altitude. If the station is functioning within that service volume, you should be able to use it for navigation. But as VFR pilots, the good thing is you should never have to rely solely on a VOR. It is a supplementary form of navigation for airplane pilots in visual conditions. All right, real quickly, I want to take 2 minutes and discuss GPS. VORs are relatively obsolete. GPS, let's be honest, that's how we navigate now in the modern national airspace system, in most cases. So GPS, Global Positioning System, works by having a constellation of satellites. Each satellite transmits a timestamp sequence, identifying the station, or the satellite, and the exact time it was transmitted, to, I believe, 8 decimals on the atomic second. The GPS receiver in the aircraft receives that timestamp, and its database knows the arcs of the different satellites, their orbits. And so it can judge, based on the satellite number at the time, it can compute distance. And so how the receiver determines your position is, if we have satellites, each satellite transmit kind of a ring, because we know the distance from the satellite. We have no bearing information from any individual satellite. So where all of these different arcs align, it trilaterates our position in three-dimensional space. You always need one satellite more than the dimensions of guidance sought. So if we're on the ground and we want to know east, west, north, south, we need 2 dimensions, we need at least 3 satellites. When we're flying, we're in three-dimensional space, we need 4 satellites. And then for enhanced accuracy, for IFR, we need 5 or more satellites. GPS is prone to jamming. It is vulnerable to solar storms. I believe we have a very strong solar storm coming tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the biggest since 04 or something.
Yeah.
I have had issues with my GPS before, like with the drone. There were days I couldn't fly it because it would have crashed into the building during solar storms. It can shift position. And so what I want to show, this is just a standard iPad with the built-in GPS receiver. And once it loads up, there we go. So you can see that little blue dot indicates my position. Accuracy within approximately 8 meters. So not too bad. Far more accurate than you can get with a VOR. However, if I'm flying a GPS approach to 200 feet over the runway, 8 to 12 meters makes a big difference in altitude over the ground. So this is not legal to fly instrument as a form of navigation. Any iPad you have, any phone, is just supplementary information. All right, so
what's a normal aircraft GPS built into the plane? What kind of accuracy is that, approximately?
Great question. I believe it's around 3 meters. And it's not necessarily that it's more precise, but it's more reliable. So right now, I am within we're very close to the required tolerance at 9 meters for Cat 1 precision-like approaches, LPV instrument approaches. I could fly into virtually any airspace in the country below 25,000 feet with that accuracy, if I could maintain it 99.9% of the time or better, which this iPad cannot.
So in the United States has approximately 22 GPS satellites. Is that right?
No, So that's where, when you look at the number of satellites, almost every source will have a different number because they're launching more all the time. As of today, we have at least 30 satellites in orbit
Okay.
with multiple redundancies.
Now, Russia has their own GPS satellite, and then
GLONASS.
yeah, and then I think Europe's talking about putting theirs, so do.
They already have their own.
They already have their
Yep,
own.
it's called
So-
Galileo.
Okay, so does our GPS receivers in the aircraft, does it take the Russian, the American, and the European and cross-correlate all of it?
It can.
It can, okay.
Yeah, so standard GPS satellites are they are not geostationary. They are orbital around they're yeah.
They stay over one location, but.
No, that would be geostationary.
Oh, that would be geostationary, that's right. I'm sorry.
That's a separate system that augments it. So I was getting confused
Okay.
with WAS. But the GPS constellation does circle all the way around the Earth. That's how our military can accurately drop bombs anywhere. Russia, China, Europe have their own systems. GPS was developed by the DoD, and then it was released to civilians, and it was allowed to be used accurately by civilians during, I believe, the Clinton administration. It is nationality specific. Most commercial aviation GPSs can make use of the Russian GLONASS system, the European Galileo system. Some, especially drones, can even make use of the Chinese Baidao nav system. If you have the subscription with current data, if that country hasn't blocked you, that's why there are different constellations. So, like GPS, right when the Russia-Ukraine war got started, within that first 18 months, they made extensive use, and still are, of commercially available small drones. The international community decided we should have a no-fly zone around Ukraine. They kept away the airliners, but people were buying US and Chinese-made drones, flying them in the war zone. So one way to prevent that from happening was to disable satellite reception on the receiver on those drones. So a couple companies pushed an update to their aircraft as soon as they powered on with any internet connectivity. The software disabled using GPS or the GLONASS system. The military can turn off GPS access. They can and do jam it. So in certain regions of the country, Florida, southern Louisiana, White Sands, New Mexico, all the way over through Vegas, they routinely will practice GPS jamming. So that's why we still need to know VORs. Every system is prone to fail, but when we get more redundancies, it's safer. GPS is an enabled modern national airspace system, and this will wrap up everything we've covered today. So the GPS enables point-to-point navigation with a high level of accuracy, reliability, and efficiency. Even small airplanes can fly in low IFR, point-to-point almost anywhere in the country. But we have an increasing amount of air traffic. We now see motor gliders that are becoming more affordable and more capable. Small aircraft now have the navigation performance of a 1970s airliner. We can now take a box with us into the airplane that is more accurate, really, than the Apollo 11 capsule. We have a higher level of tech. So the airspace is getting more busy, busier, more congested, which is why we see developing regulations with airspace equipment requirements. As glider pilots, we're still kind of tucked off in the side of airspace, relatively low. We don't bother a lot of people, they don't bother us, but we're still part of the national airspace system. Just as we see drone pilots beginning to be more prevalent, it's on all of us as airmen to integrate into that national airspace system as citizens and fellow pilots. I've had instances as an airplane pilot near Parowan, Utah. There was a glider operating off just over Parowan, doing its thermals, but it was right in the instrument approach path for our training school for instrument approaches. So we had to divert 6 aircraft for about an hour and a half. Cumulative cost was several $1,000s. That was wasted because that glider pilot did his thermal 2 nautical miles too close to our approach. But we don't own the approach. He had as much right to be there as we did. He was not in the wrong, but it was inefficient. It is legal to fly without radios in most Class Echo and Gulf airspace, but it's increased risk, and it can surprise some people and make things less safe. So, yeah.
So he didn't have a radio aboard the glider, or did he have a radio?
He did. He was not talking to anybody on frequency. The only reason I saw him is because we had ADS-B in, which we don't have time to discuss today, but it was internet supplied traffic data. His transponder pinged an ATC receiver station, and then it was sent through the internet to our aircraft. So I was able to see, all right, it's a glider because he was squawking 1202, and he popped up on my screen with his approximate altitude. That was the only way I saw him. And we were closing at about 150 knots. I was talking on the local airport frequency for the prior 15 minutes, and I tried to call up his tail number. No response. We couldn't get a hold of him to ask if he could move, and so multiple people had to divert. So everything we've talked about today prepares you for the written, prepares you to be a safer, more knowledgeable pilot, whether it's in the glider or whether it's in a 747. And we've been able to tie it together to show how we interact in that national airspace system, which is constantly developing in the 21st century. All right. Thank you for your time. Hopefully this was beneficial. If you have specific questions or really are curious about a specific subject, I'm going to hang out here for maybe another 15 minutes, and we can answer any individual questions. And then I believe we will go ahead and fly the simulator after we're done. And that was the presentation for today.
Will we have another one of these for weather specifically?
Yeah, that would be very beneficial. And I do want to do multiple ground school sessions like this in the future. Unfortunately, with my